Hello and welcome back to Seeing Things Differently. My name is Alicia, and before we begin I would like to highlight that today's video will include discussions of loss and grieving. I will be talking about losing my father to PCA dementia and sharing stories of how his skills worsened over time. It's not intended to be a sad or upsetting video, but if it feels like it might be too heavy for you, then please stop the video now. There will be more content out soon with lighter topics, so subscribe to the channel to be notified when new videos are published. Grief is a very curious thing. It's not unique to humans either. Whales, magpies, elephants, and other animals all experience grief too. It is the term used to describe the heartbreak and distress that follows a significant loss. But the strange part about losing Dad to dementia was that my family weren't just grieving after Dad had passed. We'd been grieving the loss of the person that he was for many years before that. Seeing someone you love so dearly slowly slipping away is an incredibly painful thing. This type of grief is called living grief. It is common amongst people who have a loved one with a terminal illness or are estranged from their families. It's this strange sense of knowing that your loved one is still physically present on this earth with you, but that they are always just out of reach. I can say firsthand that it is a very unpleasant feeling. It caused me to feel angry, sad, guilty, inconsolable, and longing to have more time with Dad or have him back as the way he was before his diagnosis. I don't remember exactly when this feeling started. I just know that it was toward the mid to late stages of his PCA. At the time, I didn't know that living grief was what I was experiencing. I just knew I felt completely cheated out of a parent, furious with the world, and deeply, deeply sad every time I would have to stand there and watch Dad struggle to make himself a cup of tea, or look confused meeting someone that he'd met multiple times before, like one of my school friends, for example. I don't think people really understand how emotionally challenging it can be to live with and care for your own family member, especially your own parent. And because even though I was feeling all of this, I was trying my best not to show it. I didn't want to create any more worry or stress for Mum and Dad. There are a few memories that are pretty vivid in my mind of occasions when I'd gotten frustrated with my dad over something that is now seemingly small. Like when he would be struggling to do up his shirt buttons or putting on his socks, or when using the TV remote meant he would be searching for the buttons like this. I would hurry him along and say something like, "Oh, just move out the way, let me do it." Or there would be times where he would ask a lot of questions during a film or a TV show because he wasn't able to follow the plot very well. And I would snap and say something like, Can we just watch? Do we have to keep talking over it? You know, how on earth am I going to help you understand what's happening if I can't watch it myself? And I would see him sink back into his chair or look frustrated with himself, and I felt awful. Even saying these examples out loud now makes me feel like I'm a horrible person. And I know that I'm not. I've accepted that it's not going to do me any good to spend the rest of my life beating myself up for all the times I responded poorly to a situation, or I said something that I maybe wish I could take back. You know, the guilt is still there sometimes. It stops by every now and again when I'm thinking about the time I had with Dad when he was ill. But it's gotten more comfortable to sit with. Yeah, I think as time's passed it's not so heavy. Maybe that's because when you lose someone, the memories that you end up sharing the most about them and the ones you think about the most, they become your image of that person in your head. And I have so many happy memories with my dad that I think that over time they overshadow all of the sad memories and maybe even the last few years of his life and the dementia. As well as the guilt, I did also have to acknowledge that I was feeling frustrated and impatient a lot of the time. Of course, I was also worried about the situation and for my dad, and that was all a significant amount of stuff for a teenager to be carrying. I remember feeling really lost at some points, and my mental health definitely took a bit of a hit. I was getting support from a therapist, but of the handful of therapists I saw while Dad was alive, none of them really understood Dad's condition or what that then meant for me. So I felt like it wasn't helping. You know, how am I meant to talk about how I feel when I have absolutely no idea how I feel, is what I felt like in a lot of those sessions. Of course, looking back, I can see that it was helpful. Even if I didn't think it was helping, it was actually really useful for me to have a place that I could go and be frustrated and be upset or irritated without adding any of that to Mum or Dad's plates by kind of expressing it at home. I think that by far, though, the most unpleasant aspect of living grief is something I felt when I got the news that Dad had died. Of course, I was devastated and I felt so empty, really disconnected from everything, people and the world. But at the same time, I felt this wave of relief wash over me. And actually it was very, very unpleasant. There was like a little voice in the back of my head telling me that it's over. You know, this chapter's over, it's done, we get to move on. Hopefully to the next part of our lives, which is going to be much happier than this previous one. But what a selfish thought. You know, that felt terrible. How could I think that? I didn't want Dad to be gone. I didn't want to just move on as if all of this hadn't happened. The reality is that, of course, I didn't want to lose Dad, but it was also a calming thought to know that he was at peace now, and also that things weren't going to get any worse in terms of his health. It feels like I could actually start to grieve openly as well now, because people had a tangible reason for me to be crying. It seemed like it was easier for other people to sympathise with the grief of Dad having passed away than with the experience of that living grief from slowly seeing his abilities deteriorate day after day. I knew that, ultimately, because sometimes when I would be grieving Dad, and this would be while he was still alive, I would often get the question from people of like, he's not dead though, right? Well, no, but he will be, and parts of the person that I remember him to be are fading. And that question would always make me feel like people just thought that I was being dramatic or, you know, overreacting to the situation. But I know now that it's because these people really didn't understand even a smidge of what I was experiencing. All of this to say, though, that living grief is both a complex and common experience when caring for a loved one with dementia. Naturally, everyone grieves differently, but I think perhaps the reason some people felt I wasn't as emotional as they'd expected after Dad died was that I had already spent years in that state of grief and questioning. It might feel like people don't care about the hurricane of emotions that you're going through, but if I can share one thing, it's to talk about how you're feeling. I can assure you, people probably just don't understand or know what an appropriate response is to this situation, but they do want to help you if you let them. Speaking to a close friend or another family member you trust can help shift some of that weight off of you, so as you give yourself a moment to breathe. And if you don't have a person that you feel comfortable talking to, then there are also loads of great resources online about living grief. Reddit has some good threads on anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief and living grief are kind of the same thing, just obviously different title. There's also Facebook groups where this is discussed, but these are not dementia specific, I should say. These are for loss and grieving in general. In terms of simply understanding more about living grief, I've linked a couple of web pages in the description bar below, and I also recommend a book called When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. I think I'm saying that right. The book itself is not about dementia, it's about a doctor who was diagnosed with cancer. And the story basically explores him coming to terms with this diagnosis and with this theme of living grief. Please also feel free to email in your own experiences if you would like to share them. I have also linked our email address below. And if you've enjoyed this video, then please remember to like and subscribe to see when new videos are posted. And if you can think of someone who might enjoy this video, then please share it with them too. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.